The court chained Sivra Kest before an altar that had consumed 27 guilty women and left no bones behind. By midnight, the priests expected it to take her too. The starving moon chapel had no windows. The altar did not eat flesh first. It counted hunger. Cold silver fire burned inside wall hollows, illuminating stone wolves with open mouths. At the chapel's center stood a circle of black moonstone. A narrow seam divided it from edge to edge, like lips that had forgotten how to close. Old Moonstone remembered every offering redirected before it reached the packs. And redirected hunger always left an account. Sivra knelt 3 steps away with iron chains around her wrists and throat. The collar carried the temple oath she had inherited as a child. Serve the chapel. Measure its stores. Question nothing it consumes. Tonight, a final command had been added. Become the offering. The oath had not named guilt. It had named replacement. High Moon Priestess Halvra Sorn stood behind her in white robes, one hand on a wolfbone staff. Sivra Kest, oath-bound servant of the lower chapel, you are charged with corrupting the winter offerings and carrying sacred hunger into the pack barracks. The nobles discussed her as though she had already become chapel property. The western grain spoiled after she counted it. 3 winter wolves refused moon milk from her hands. The lower barracks lost 2 hunting lines this season. Sivra had counted grain because the storekeeper could not read. The milk had soured before it reached her. The hunt wolves had fallen during Dregmar's coldest week in 30 years. But an oath-bound servant could not accuse a moon priestess of redirecting blame. Halvra lowered the staff. Do you deny that the offerings darkened beneath your touch? No. What caused it? I do not know. Yet you continued serving near the stores. You ordered me to. A horn sounded beyond the doors. Winter entered with the Alpha King. Rhaelor Draeg crossed the threshold, wearing black armor edged in dull silver. A crown of interlocking wolf fangs rested against his dark hair, each fang holding pale lunar light. Behind him walked no living beast. His wolf shadow followed across the stone. It was enormous, blacker than the walls, with ember-gray eyes and visible ribs. The court called it the Crown Wolf, a sacred reflection of Dregmar's strength. Sivra thought it looked starved, not hungry for prey. Hungry in the way a dead is hungry when someone else has been fed from it. The shadow looked at her once, then away. It did not approach or pull against her chains. It stood behind its king with the stillness of something forced to carry hunger. Rhaelor stopped before Halvra. Why was judgment delayed? The altar required the crown as witness. The accused carries a hunger curse. Rhaelor's gaze moved to Sivra. What did she take? Winter offerings, moon, milk purity, the strength of royal hunting lines. I asked what she took. Nothing that can be weighed after corruption. Rhaelor looked at the blackened skin beneath Sivra's oath collar. Can you stand? Yes, Majesty. Then stand for judgment. Sivra rose without accepting the guard's hand. Halvra began the offering prayer. Sacred hunger beneath the moon, receive the body that carried famine into innocent blood. Consume guilt so the packs may feed. Sivra was led onto the altar. Nothing happened. The seam did not open. The silver flames did not bend toward her. Even the iron collar stayed dark. Halvra repeated the prayer. Still nothing. A priest cut Sivra's palm and let 3 drops fall onto the stone. The altar ignored her blood. Wrong offering, the cold stone seemed to say without words. The altar did not shield Sivra. It simply refused to miscount her. Whispers moved around the chapel. Halvra struck her staff against the floor. Take her to her knees. 2 guards forced Sivra down. The altar did not move. Rhaelor descended from the royal platform. You said it recognized guilt. It does. It has recognized nothing. The curse may be resisting sacred hunger, Halvra said. The crown must enter the circle and command the altar to feed. His wolf shadow flattened its ears. The crown wolf was afraid of the altar. Not because it would be killed, but because it would finally be counted. Rhaelor stepped onto the moonstone. The seam opened beneath his boots. Silver light tore from the fang crown. His body arched as the altar pulled the light downward. Behind him, the giant black wolf shadow threw back its head and howled with the pain of something being consumed alive. The nobles recoiled. Halvra's staff slipped. Sivra remained on her knees, untouched. The silver light passed around her as if she were not food at all. Symbols awakened beneath Rhaelor's feet. Offering rejected. Witness present. Crown hunger recognized. The altar had refused to consume her. It had not yet named what the crown had been fed. The first ration line had only begun to glow. Rhaelor looked down at Sivra, while the altar continued pulling light from his crown. "What are you? I do not know what you call me," she whispered. "But you did not bring me here because the altar was hungry for me." The crown wolf howled again. This time, the moonstone answered beneath the king, and the first hidden ration line began to glow. Not beneath Sivra, beneath the king. The altar had rejected Sivra as offering, but the hidden ration line beneath Rhaelor's crown still had not named what fed the crown wolf. Silver light stretched from the fang crown into the black moonstone in one trembling line. It passed between Rhaelor's boots, split beneath the altar seam, and disappeared into symbols older than Draegmar's royal banners. Sivra remained chained on her knees. The iron at her throat had not loosened. The guards had not stepped away. The altar had refused to consume her, but refusal was not freedom. It had corrected an account, not rescued the woman placed inside it. The altar did not defend Sivra. It simply refused to let sacred law miscount her. Behind Rhaelor, the crown wolf crouched low, its enormous ribs moving beneath the darkness. Each pulse of silver light made its outline briefly solid. For those moments, Sivra could see how thin it truly was. The court called that shadow the kingdom's strength. The altar counted it as something fed. High Moon Priestess Halvara Sorn recovered her wolf-bone staff. "Remove the servant from the circle." The crown's response has been distorted by her curse. The hidden ration line brightened beneath Rhaelor. No guard moved. His face had gone still, but the tendons in his neck remained tight from the light being pulled through his crown. "You said the altar recognized sacred hunger. It has been disturbed." "By what?" "An oath-bound servant standing where no servant should possess witness." Sivra looked at the line beneath him. "Read what the crown hunger was fed from." Halvara turned on her. "Offering accounts cannot be tried through an oath-bound chapel servant." "I am not trying the account. You have no standing to interpret Moonstone. The altar has already counted me as witness. A witness is not a judge." "No," Sivra said. "But a witness can name what everyone else refuses to look at." Halvara raised her staff toward the guards. "Silence her." Rhaelor's gaze cut across the circle. The guards stopped before touching Sivra. He did not order her freed. He did not break her chains. He only looked down at the ration line burning beneath his crown and said, "Let the account finish." The command did not make him innocent. The hunger had fed his crown, his shadow, and his reign. A priestess's hand did not make the crown wolf innocent, and royal ignorance did not return what the pax had been denied. The altar seam widened. Cold light spread through the moonstone in 4 separate paths. Each path carried the pale scent of sour milk, winter grain, old blood, and smoke from the lower barracks. Words filled the stone. Moon milk stores entered. Pack rations diverted. Crown wolf fed. Servant offering prepared. The altar had named the feeding. It had not yet named the seal that made diversion holy. The crown wolf howled. The sound struck the chapel walls hard enough to shake ash from the silver flames. The first account opened beneath the words. Rows of moonmilk bowls appeared inside the stone, each one marked for injured hunt wolves, winter patrols, and lower barracks weakened by famine. Sivra recognized the storage symbols. She had carried those bowls from the lower vaults and watched Halvara's attendants replace their silver seals with black wax. The record showed where the milk went. Not to the barracks, not to the hunt wolves. The bowls were carried through a hidden passage beneath the royal platform. Priests poured them into a circular basin carved with the same fang pattern as Rhaelor's crown. Moonmilk stores entered. The second path opened. Grain sacks marked for the lower packs were divided before reaching the barracks. Half continued toward hungry soldiers. The rest entered chapel wagons under ceremonial seal. Pack rations diverted. Sivra saw the winter count written beside them. Each season the barracks received less while the crown basin received more. The third account burned brighter. Silver liquid rose from the basin in thin streams. It entered the fang crown during royal blessing rites, passed through Rhaelor's blood, and fed the shadow standing behind him. Crown wolf fed. The great black wolf did not grow healthier. It grew larger. The court had mistaken size for strength and hunger for sacred power, and Halvara had taught them to kneel before the mistake. Rhaelor watched the memory of himself kneeling before Halvara while stolen moon milk entered his crown. Those rites were named winter protections. They preserved the royal shadow, Halvara said, with pack rations, with offerings necessary to maintain unity. Offerings taken from wolves already starving. The crown wolf carries every pack beneath one shadow. Its survival protects them all. Sivra looked at the visible ribs beneath that shadow. It was never surviving. It was being kept hungry enough to keep feeding. Halvara's composure cracked for only a breath. You understand nothing of royal burden. Sivra faced her. You did not find hunger in me. You placed hunger under the crown and made me kneel above it. Then you called the account sacred because the crown had already eaten from it. The final account opened. A woman in an oath collar appeared before the altar. Not Sivra. The image showed another servant from years earlier, chained in the same place while the crown basin dimmed beneath the royal platform. Priests marked her as corrupted. Her body was prepared as an offering just as the crown wolf's feeding account began to fail. Servant offering prepared. The court drew back from the stone. Halvara struck her staff against the altar. Crown hunger cannot accuse moon priest law. Black wax spread from the staff's tip, crawling toward the glowing account lines. Rhaelor's hand moved toward Sivra's throat chain, then stopped. If he freed her before the record completed, Halvara would name the moonstone compromised by royal favor. Sivra saw the restraint and did not mistake it for protection. She remained chained because his law had placed her there. The black wax reached the first line. Sivra leaned toward the altar despite the collar biting her skin. Do not let her make diversion look like sacrifice. Rhaelor planted one boot over the seal line. The altar continued counting. Sivra had not corrupted the winter offerings. The starving moon altar remembered moon milk stores entered, pack rations diverted, crown wolf fed, and the oath-bound chapel servant prepared, as offering once the hunger beneath the crown began to show. But the moonstone had not yet named, whose seal turned diversion into offering. The altar had named what fed the crown wolf, but not whose moon priest seal made stolen rations holy. The feeding account remained open beneath Rhaelor Draeg's boots, its silver lines buried halfway under black wax spreading from Halvara Sorn's staff. The crown wolf crouched behind him, enormous and thin, each visible rib cutting through its shadow. Sivra remained chained at the altar's center. The iron collar still carried the command that had prepared her as replacement. Her wrists remained bound. No priest had restored her standing, and the nobles along the walls still watched her as though the moonstone's refusal only meant that her execution required a different ritual. The altar had not protected her. It had only refused to let the account name the wrong debtor. Black wax hardened over the hidden ration line. Halvara straightened, recovering the calm authority she wore whenever doctrine offered her somewhere to hide. The feeding irregularity will be examined under sealed moon. Priest review. Sealed by whom? Sivra asked. Halvara's eyes moved to her. Pre-seal records cannot be tried through a servant the altar has not restored. Sivra looked at the wax covering the evidence. Read whose seal made diversion sacred. A murmur moved through the nobles. Not agreement. Alam. The question no longer accused a careless storekeeper or a hungry attendant. It threatened the authority that allowed theft to enter the chapel as ration loss and leave beneath the crown as holy blessing. Halvara struck the moonstone. Sanctified offerings cannot be accused by altar misreading. The wax spread toward Sivra's knees. Rhaelor's hand tightened around the edge of his fang crown. Silver light continued draining from it in thin strands. Each strand entered the altar and passed through the crown wolf, making the shadow rise taller while its body appeared more starved. Open the priest seal, he said. Halvara faced him. Majesty, the moon priest seal stands above common ration law. Without it, no offering can be distinguished from theft, tribute, or voluntary sacrifice. Then let it prove which one occurred. The altar is responding through an unrecognized servant. Rhaelor looked at Sivra. He could remove her from the stone. He could break the collar and declare the ritual corrupted. The court would obey him, and Halvara would bury every account beneath the claim that royal interference had changed the altar's reading. Instead, he left Sivra chained. Let the seal answer without restoration. The words did not free her. They only forced the record to remain dangerous. The moonstone shifted beneath him. A narrow circle opened around the black wax. Silver symbols pressed upward through it, beginning where diversion became ceremony. Moon priest seal entered. Diversion sanctified. Lower barracks deprived. Crown blessing renewed. The seal had named how theft became blessing. It had not yet named why a servant had to become the offering when the account began to fail. A vision opened inside the stone. Halvara stood in the lower store chamber, before rows of ration measures marked for the barracks. Younger priests waited beside her, each holding strips of white sealing cloth. The measures carried pack marks. The cloth carried moon priest marks. Halvara pressed the base of her wolfbone staff into melted silver wax. When she stamped the first measure, the barracks mark disappeared beneath a crescent seal. Moon priest seal entered. A clerk hesitated. These stores belong to the Western Hunt Lines. They are now sacred reserve. The lower barracks have fallen beneath winter measure. The crown cannot weaken while the packs remain divided. She stamped the next measure. Diversion sanctified. The scene shifted. In the lower barracks, adult hunt wolves stood beside empty troughs while soldiers divided one ration among 3 mouths. A wounded patrol leader poured water into the residue of a moon milk bowl and called it enough. Above them, priests recorded the missing portions as voluntary offerings. Lower barracks deprived. Several nobles wore silver blessing cords around their wrists, the same cords distributed during winters when soldiers below the chapel had gone hungry. The final record opened. Rhaelor knelt before the crown basin during the midwinter renewal. Halvara lifted the fang crown and poured sanctified silver light through its inner markings. The court bowed as the crown wolf expanded behind him, immense and terrible. Crown blessing renewed. The blessing had shone from Rhaelor's crown. The court had praised his strength. The lower barracks had paid for it. Sivra looked at Halvara. You did not hide theft beneath hunger. You made hunger kneel and called it blessing. Halvara's face remained composed. The lower barracks survived because the crown remained strong enough to command the packs. They survived with empty troughs. They survived. And that was enough? It was enough for the kingdom. Rhaelor stared at the memory of himself rising beneath the renewed crown while hungry wolves bowed beyond the chapel walls. If a priest seal made theft holy under my crown, he said, then my reign did not merely receive stolen offerings. It blessed them. The crown wolf lowered its head, not toward Sivra, under the weight of what had fed it. The seal was Halvara's, but the blessing had shone from Rhaelor's crown. And when the stolen hunger no longer fed enough, the chapel had needed a body to close the deficit. The prior account had ended with its final line, servant offering prepared. The altar had not yet opened that line. Halvara drove her staff into the moonstone. Black wax surged over the records. Sanctified offerings cannot be accused by altar misreading. The silver lines began to close. Sivra pulled against the chains. Read the seal before she makes the barracks' hunger disappear beneath prayer. The altar did not defend Sivra, it simply refused to let the seal rename theft. Rhaelor placed one hand against his crown. Then he tore the brightest fang free. He did not free Sivra. He paid the altar with crown light long enough to keep the record from closing. Silver radiance spilled across the moonstone, cutting through Halvara's wax and holding the final account open. Halvara's moon priest seal had not protected the winter stores. It had sanctified diversion, deprived the lower barracks, and renewed the crown wolf's blessing through stolen hunger shining from Rhaelor's own crown. But the servant offering line still had not named whose body had been used before Sivra's. The moon priest's seal had named how stolen hunger became blessing, but not why the chapel prepared servants as offerings when the crown wolf account failed. The broken fang in Rhaelor Draeg's hand continued pouring silver light across the altar. It held Halvara's black wax away from the final line, but every pulse made the crown wolf shudder behind him. Sivra remained chained at the moonstone center. Her wrists were numb beneath the iron. The oath caller still named her as replacement, not witness. Rhaelor had paid the altar enough crown light to keep the account open, but he had not removed her from the circle. The altar did not save Sivra. It only refused to close another deficit under the wrong name. Halvara Sorn stood beyond the spreading silver light, both hands around her wolf-bone staff. The seal account has already exceeded lawful witness. The chapel will close the remaining line. Sivra looked at the words still burning faintly beneath the wax. Servant offering prepared. Read the servant offering line. Halvara's expression did not change. Offering body records cannot be tried through a servant already prepared for sacred closure. Then you admit my body was prepared before guilt was proven. I admit only that sacred closure requires a vessel. A vessel you first have to condemn. The nobles along the wall watched without speaking. Their silence had changed. It was no longer the certainty of people witnessing punishment. It was the caution of people beginning to wonder whether their blessings carried a cost they had been trained not to count. Rhaelor closed his hand around the broken fang. Open the servant account. Halvara turned toward him. Majesty, closure records preserve the throne during sacred deficit. They cannot be read without weakening the bond between crown and kingdom. The bond is already feeding on stolen hunger. The kingdom still stands. Then let the account show what held it upright. Halvara struck her staff against the moonstone. Black wax surged toward the unopened line. The altar answered first. A narrow crack appeared beneath Sivra's knees. Cold light passed around her chains and entered the deeper stone. It did not loosen the iron. It did not touch her wounds. It moved past her because she was not the account being opened. 4 records appeared. Crown account weakened. Servant body selected. Guilt charge assigned. Deficit sealed. The crown wolf lowered itself against the floor. Its shadow stretched across the altar, but it did not reach for Sivra. It remained behind Rhaelor, a debt carrier forced to witness the cost of its own strength. The first closed account opened. The altar did not raise 27 women. It showed one. A young chapel scullion named Aneth Rusk appeared inside the moonstone record. She wore a plain brown dress and carried ash buckets from the silver braziers. Her hands were rough from lye, and one side of her hair had been singed short by altar flame. She was not kneeling before judgment. She was working. The record shifted to the crown basin beneath the chapel. Silver light inside it had thinned to a weak thread. The crown wolf's shadow flickered against the wall while priests counted the remaining stores. Crown account weakened. A younger Halvara stood over the basin with 3 moon priests. The winter offerings no longer sustain renewal. One priest looked at the empty measures. The lower barracks cannot yield more without losing another hunting line. Then the deficit requires closure. The record moved upstairs. Aneth carried ash through the chapel while priests watched her from behind the columns. She had no noble family, no pack protector, and no legal standing beyond her inherited service oath. Servant body selected. The moonstone showed Halvara opening the chapel register. Aneth's work record contained no accusation. The next line appeared later. Moon milk contamination. A second followed. Sacred ash mishandled. Then a third. Hunger carried into the lower stores. Guilt charge assigned. Sivra stared at the words. The accusations had not led to Aneth's selection. They had been written after it. You did not offer guilty women, Sivra said. You made women guilty when the account needed flesh. Halvara held her gaze. A sacred deficit cannot remain open. If the crown fails, every pack fractures beneath rival hunger. So you found a servant no house would defend. I found a vessel capable of preserving the realm. You found someone whose innocence cost less than admitting the crown was starving. Rhaelor watched the record of Aneth being chained before the same altar. His face hardened as the younger king in the vision entered the chapel wearing the fang crown. He did not ask why the scullion had suddenly become dangerous. He stood as royal witness while Halvara read the charges. The altar opened. Aneth disappeared into silver darkness. The crown basin beneath the floor filled. The crown wolf rose larger behind the throne. Deficit sealed. Rhaelor's voice came low. The offering restored the crown account. Halvara answered carefully. The closure preserved royal strength during famine. With a body selected before guilt existed. The law recognized guilt before the altar consumed her. The law assigned guilt because the altar required her. Halvara's jaw tightened. Sacred closure cannot be accused by a condemned offering. Sivra pulled against her chains. Condemned by the people who needed her body, the silver account began to darken as black wax returned across the record. Rhaelor's hand moved towards Sivra's collar, then stopped. If he freed her now, Halvara would call the opened account an act of royal interference. The restraint left Sivra chained before the same mechanism that had taken Aneth, but the record remained visible. Rhaelor looked at the fading image of the first consumed woman. "If servants were prepared to close the hunger my crown could no longer hide," he said. "Then my reign did not only bless theft, it fed on bodies when theft failed." The crown wolf's howl came softer this time. Not defense, recognition. Halvara drove her staff into the crack. Closed the condemned account. The moonstone began folding Aneth's image back into darkness. Sivra leaned forward until the collar cut her breath. Read before she turned selection into guilt again. The broken crown fang flared in Rhaelor's hand. The account held. The first consumed woman had not been guilty when the altar took her. The crown account had weakened. A servant body had been selected, a guilt charge assigned, and the deficit sealed so the crown wolf's hunger could continue wearing the shape of sacred strength. Aneth Rusk's guilt had been manufactured, but the altar still had not shown what her body became after the deficit closed. Her image remained trapped beneath the moonstone, one hand lifted as silver darkness folded around her. No spirit rose from the altar. No dead woman reached for Sivra. The record held only the final moment before Aneth disappeared, and the crown basin beneath the chapel filled with light. Sivra remained chained in the same place. The iron collar pressed against her throat each time she breathed. Her wrists had begun to swell beneath the links. Rhaelor still held the broken crown fang over the altar, paying enough silver light to keep Aneth's account from sealing. He had not freed Sivra. He had not touched her. The altar had not protected her. It had simply kept the wrong name from closing over the debt. Behind Rhaelor, the crown wolf stood enormous and hollow-ribbed. The shadow watched Aneth's fading image with ember-gray eyes that carried no mercy and no hunger for prey, only exhaustion. Sivra looked at the silver basin glowing beneath the record. Read what the offering became. Halvara Sorn raised her wolf-bone staff. Closure. Transfer records cannot be tried through a condemned servant awaiting the same right. Then the transfer should have nothing to hide. The sacred body is consumed. Consumed by what? The altar. Sivra looked down at the moonstone beneath her knees. "It did not want me." Halvara's expression tightened. "Because your corruption disrupted the count." "No, because you brought it the wrong debtor." A low sound moved through the chapel. Not from the nobles. From the crown wolf. Its shadow opened its jaws, but the sound that came out was thin, almost broken. Rhaelor turned toward it. For the first time, the king looked less afraid of losing his crown than of understanding what his wolf had been forced to carry. "Open the transfer account," he said. Halvara faced him sharply. "Majesty, closure transfer is the most protected moonpriest law. It binds offering, altar, crown, and wolf shadow. If exposed before an unrecognized servant, the bond may fracture." Rhaelor's gaze returned to Aneth's image. "Then it is already fractured. We simply called the crack sacred." Halvara drove the staff into the altar. Black wax spread toward the record. Sivra pulled against her chains. "Read before she makes disappearance look like consumption." The broken fang in Rhaelor's hand flared. The wax stopped. The moonstone opened 4 new lines beneath Aneth's name. Offering body entered. Life measure converted. Crown deficit credited. Wolf shadow debt retained. The crown wolf recoiled. The first line opened. Aneth's body did not fall into a pit of teeth or flame. The altar seam widened beneath her, surrounding her in silver light, while priests measured her pulse through the oath collar. Each bead appeared as a narrow mark across the moonstone. Offering body entered. Halvara's younger voice sounded from the record. "The vessel carries sufficient remaining years." A priest beside her hesitated. "She is 23. Then the closure will hold." Sivra felt the collar around her own throat pulse once. The oath did not measure guilt. It measured how much life remained available to take. The second line opened. Silver marks left Aneth's pulse one by one. They flowed downward through the altar and gathered inside the crown basin. Her body did not feed the stone. Her unspent years became light. Life measure converted. Rhaelor stared at the record. The altar took her life measure. Halvara answered carefully. "It transformed mortal duration into royal continuity." "You mean it turned her remaining life into crown strength?" "The kingdom required stability. She required the years you stole." Halvara's face remained still. "A servant oath belongs to the chapel." Sivra looked at the iron around her wrists. "An oath binds service. It does not make time ownerless." The third line brightened. The silver basin beneath the chapel filled with Aneth's converted life measure, Priests carried that light upward through hidden channels and poured it into the fang crown. The dim sections of the crown ignited. The court in the vision bowed. Crown deficit credited. Rhaelor watched his younger self receive the renewed crown. He had believed the ritual restored sacred power drawn from the moon. The light had come from Aneth's stolen years. His jaw hardened. I wore her life as royal strength. Halvara lifted her chin. You wore the continuation of Draegmar. The continuation was hers. The final line opened. Not all of Aneth's hunger entered the crown. The pain of selection, the terror of false guilt, the emptiness left by years taken before they were lived, none of that became silver light. It moved elsewhere. Black residue gathered beneath the altar, crossed the hidden channels, and entered the wolf shadows standing behind the king. The crown wolf expanded. Its body became larger. Its ribs became sharper. Wolf shadow debt retained. Sivra looked at the enormous beast behind Rhaelor. The crown received her life. The wolf kept what was owed. Halvara's fingers tightened around the staff. The royal shadow contains all burdens the crown cannot display. You call stolen lives burdens because debt sounds too much like responsibility. The crown wolf exists to carry the kingdom's hunger. No, Sivra said. It carries the hunger the kingdom refused to return. Rhaelor stepped closer to his shadow. The wolf did not bow to him. It lowered its head because the weight inside it had finally been named. The hunger had fed his crown, strengthened his reign, and enlarged his sacred shadow. Halvara had administered the transfer, but Rhaelor had worn the credited life and called the suffering behind him power. If the offering's life was converted into my crown, he said, and the unpaid debt was forced into my wolf, then every blessing of my reign has been divided between stolen years and hidden hunger. Halvara struck the altar again. A condemned body has no claim after sacred conversion. Sivra faced her. You made her guilty, took the years she had not lived, and called the remainder no one's debt. The black wax began covering Aneth's name. Rhaelor's hand moved towards Sivra's collar. Again it stopped. The account was still open. Freedom given before the record finished could be used to discredit everything the altar had shown. Sivra remained chained while his crown continued draining. She looked at the fading lines. Hold it open. Rhaelor closed both hands around the broken fang. Silver light burned across his palms. The record held. Aneth Rusk had not been consumed because the altar hungered for flesh. Her remaining life had been converted into crown strength, while the terror, deprivation, and unpaid hunger created by her false condemnation were retained inside the crown wolf as royal debt. And Aneth was only the first life measure hidden inside the shadow. A second pulse moved through the crown wolf, and one of its shadowed ribs split into silver light. The beast staggered behind Rhaelor Draeg. Its enormous body did not fall, but the darkness around its shoulders thinned enough for the chapel wall to show through. The court had always called those visible ribs proof that the crown wolf carried famine without yielding to it. Sivra now understood the lie. The wolf had not been displaying hunger. It had been losing itself to keep the crown full. She remained chained before the altar, her knees numb against the moonstone. The iron at her throat still measured the life Halvara's right intended to convert. Rhaelor had kept 5 accounts open, but none of them had restored Sivra's standing or removed the command beneath her oath. Become the offering. The word still waited inside the collar. Rhaelor turned toward his wolf shadow. Read what the retained debt took from it. Halvara Sorn stepped between the beast and the glowing altar lines. Crown. Shadow accounts cannot be tried through a condemned vessel. Sivra lifted her bound hands. Then let the king ask what his wolf has paid. The crown wolf is not a claimant. It is carrying the claim. The royal shadow exists to absorb burdens the sovereign cannot. Rhaelor's gaze fixed on Halvara. Cannot or was never allowed to see. For the first time, the priestess did not answer immediately. The crown wolf's split rib pulsed again. Silver light traveled from the wound in its shadow toward the fang crown. The missing fang in Rhaelor's hand had left an empty socket, yet the crown continued drawing from the beast as if trying to repair itself. Sivra watched the light leave the wolf. Read what the shadow paid. Halvara drove her staff down. Black wax formed a ring around the beast's paws. Royal shadow expenditure is protected under sovereign hunger law. The The altar seam widened before the wax could close. 4 lines appeared beneath the crown wolf. Closure debt entered. Wolf strength withdrawn. Crown vitality maintained. Shadow collapse deferred. The first record opened. Aneth's unpaid hunger entered the crown wolf as black residue, just as the prior account had shown. But the new record followed the debt farther. The residue did not remain still. It attached itself to the beast's ribs, each stolen life forming a dark weight the wolf had to carry through every royal blessing. Closure debt entered. The second line opened. During the winter after Aneth's death, Rhaelor fell ill with fever. The vision showed him younger, lying beneath black furs while the fang crown dimmed beside his bed. Halvara stood over the crown wolf. His blood cannot sustain the royal bond, a healer said. The shadow can. Halvara placed both hands against the beast's head. Silver strength tore from its body. The wolf convulsed. In the bed, Rhaelor's breathing steadied. Wolf strength withdrawn. Rhaelor stared at the vision. You used it to heal me, to preserve the Alpha line. You drained my wolf. The shadow replenishes through the crown. Sivra looked at the ribs cutting through the darkness. With more stolen offerings. Halvara's mouth hardened. With sacred closure, the third line opened. Year after year, every weakness in Rhaelor's body was answered by drawing strength from the crown wolf. Battle wounds closed faster. Poison left his blood before dawn. Exhaustion vanished during pack wars. Each recovery strengthened the legend that the Draeg bloodline could not be broken. Crown vitality maintained. The court had praised Rhaelor's endurance. Songs had named him the Winter Fang, the king whose body refused collapse. Behind every victory, the crown wolf grew thinner. Rhaelor looked down at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. My strength was not mine. Halvara answered with controlled precision. Your strength belonged to the crown. That is not what I said. The distinction is meaningless under sovereign law. It was not meaningless to the wolf that paid. The beast lifted its head at his voice. It did not approach him. It stood several steps away, caught between command and exhaustion. The fourth line opened. The crown wolf had reached the edge of collapse 7 years earlier. Its shadow had begun breaking during a royal blessing, leaving pieces of darkness across the chapel floor. Halvara had ordered another servant offering. The converted life measure replenished the crown. The newly created debt entered the wolf. Its destruction was delayed, but the burden grew heavier. Shadow collapse deferred. Sivra felt the meaning settle through the chapel. The offerings did not heal the wolf. They postponed its death by giving it more debt to carry while the crown continued stealing its remaining strength. You were not feeding it, she said. You were keeping it alive long enough to keep draining it. Halvara turned toward her. A royal shadow has no life apart from the sovereign. The crown wolf growled. The sound was weak but unmistakable. Several nobles stepped back. Sivra did not. The altar disagrees, she said. The altar records expenditure. It does not grant personhood to shadow. No. It counts what was taken. Rhaelor faced the beast. His expression had changed from anger to something quieter and more dangerous. Recognition. All his life, the crown wolf had followed him without affection. It had never leaned into his hand or rested beside his throne. The court called that distance majesty. It had been pain. If my reign survived by withdrawing strength from my wolf, Rhaelor said, then every miracle credited to my blood was another wound hidden behind me. Halvara lifted her staff. The crown and shadow are one legal body. Then I wounded myself and called it sovereignty. The admission moved through the chapel more sharply than accusation. Black wax surged toward the 4 records. Shadow expenditure cannot be accused by the body prepared to replace it, Halvara said. Sivra looked at her collar. Replace it. The command beneath the iron suddenly meant more than death. Her life measure had not been prepared only to refill the crown account. The crown wolf was failing again. Halvara had selected Sivra because the shadow no longer had enough strength left to feed Rhaelor. The altar did not loosen her chains. It opened one final line beneath the collar. Replacement measure matched. Rhaelor saw it. His face went still. Sivra had not been condemned because she carried hunger into the chapel. She had been measured because the crown wolf was collapsing, and her remaining life was sufficient to keep the king's strength alive. The match beneath Sivra's collar was not a prophecy. It was an inventory decision. Silver letters burned around the iron at her throat while the starving moon altar measured her against the failing crown wolf. The shadow remained behind Rhaelor. One rib split open with pale light, its enormous body trembling from years of strength withdrawn in the king's name. Sivra stayed chained at the center of the moonstone. The altar had exposed why her life was sufficient to delay the wolf's collapse. It had not yet explained why Halvara had selected her from every servant in Draegmar. Rhaelor stared at the glowing line. Replacement measure matched. Read why her measure matched, he said. Halvara Sorn stepped over the edge of the black wax surrounding the altar. Replacement calculations are protected under sacred continuity law. Sivra raised her bound hands. You accuse me of corrupting the offerings. The offerings darkened beneath your touch. Then read what my touch recorded. Halvara's eyes sharpened. An oath-bound servant cannot try the measurements written into her own body. My body was already tried when you prepared it for the altar. You were judged under chapel law. I was selected before the charges existed. The nobles did not speak. They had seen that pattern once already in Aneth Rusk's account. A servant body chosen first, guilt written afterward. Rhaelor's gaze moved from Sivra's collar to Halvara's staff. Open the replacement calculation. The record may damage the oath holding her to the chapel. It was meant to consume her. It was meant to preserve the crown. Rhaelor's expression hardened. There's no longer a defense. Halvara struck the stone. Black wax rose around Sivra's knees, sealing the silver line beneath her collar. Replacement measures cannot be accused by the vessel they identify. The altar did not loosen her chains. It did not drive the wax away for her. It simply continued counting beneath it. 4 records appeared around Sivra. Store counts retained. Oath tally altered. Deficit witness identified. Replacement designation entered. The first line opened. Sivra saw herself years younger, carrying winter bowls from the lower vaults. Each bowl passed beneath her hands before reaching the chapel stores. She had been ordered to count the measures aloud because the old storekeeper's sight had begun to fail. 12 bowls entered. 9 reached the barracks. 3 disappeared beneath priest seal cloth. No one had taught Sivra formal account law, but the inherited oath around her throat heard every number she spoke. Store counts retained. The record moved through years. Grain sacks, moon milk bowls, dried meat for hunting patrols, healing broth for injured wolves. Sivra counted what entered. Later, she counted what remained. The numbers never matched. Whenever she touched an offering that had been divided beneath a false seal, the surface darkened. Not because hunger lived inside her, because the oath remembered the missing portion. Rhaelor looked toward the blackened moon milk stains still visible along the chapel steps. Her touch marked the deficit. Halvara replied. Her oath reacted unpredictably to sacred transfer. You called it corruption, because servants are not permitted to retain priest accounts. Sivra looked at her. I did not steal your accounts. You wrote them into every bowl you made me carry. The second line opened. Halvara stood in the oath chamber with Sivra's service record spread before her. The inherited collar had begun showing silver tally marks along its inner edge, 1 mark for every redirected measure Sivra had counted. A younger priest noticed them. The servant oath is retaining store differences. Halvara touched the marks with the tip of her staff. Remove the visible tally. It returns after each winter count. Then alter the oath. Oath tally altered. The command inside Sivra's collar changed. Measure the stores became obey the stores. Report every difference became question nothing it consumes. The tally marks disappeared from the outside. They did not vanish. They moved beneath Sivra's skin. She felt suddenly cold. Every burning ache beneath the collar, every night she had woken choking after counting winter stores, had been an account trying to remain legible inside her body. The third line opened. The crown wolf's shadow had begun failing months before Sivra's judgment. Halvara's priests searched the chapel oaths for a servant with enough remaining life to sustain the crown. They found Sivra, but her years were not the only reason she matched. Her body carried the retained deficits from every offering she had counted. If the altar consumed her, those missing accounts would close with her. Deficit witness identified. Sivra understood before the final line appeared. You did not choose me only because I had enough life left. Halvara remained silent. You chose me because the theft was written inside my oath. The servant carried unstable sacred residue. I carried the count. The final record opened. Halvara's staff entered Sivra's name beneath sacred closure. The charges appeared afterward. Corrupted milk, spoiled grain, weakened hunting lines. Replacement designation entered. The altar was expected to convert Sivra's remaining years into crown strength. Her death would also erase the only living record connecting years of stolen rations to the blessing above them. Rhaelor's voice turned low. You prepared the witness as fuel. Halvara faced him. She was an oath-bound servant carrying dangerous account residue. Her removal would have stabilized both chapel and crown. My crown, your kingdom, my wolf, your reign. Rhaelor looked at Sivra, still chained beneath the law that carried his authority. If her body was selected because it held the proof my crown refused to count, then my reign did not merely prepare a servant as replacement. It prepared the witness as fuel. The crown wolf lowered its head, not toward Sivra, toward the tally marks now glowing beneath her skin. Halvara drove her staff against the collar line. A servant oath cannot testify against the chapel that owns it. Black wax climbed Sivra's throat. Her breath shortened. Rhaelor moved one step, then stopped before touching the iron. The account had not finished. Breaking the collar now would let Halvara call every visible tally the result of royal interference. Sivra forced the words through the pressure. Read what you tried to bury with me. The altar opened one final mark beneath her collar. Witness count active. Sivra had not darkened the winter offerings. Her inherited oath had recorded every portion redirected beneath Moon Priest law, and Halvara had selected her because consuming the servant would both refill the crown and erase the living account. The tally beneath Sivra's skin did not break her chains. It changed what the altar was allowed to read. Silver marks climbed from beneath the oath collar and spread across her throat in narrow lines, each one linked to a winter store she had counted, a ration she had watched disappear, or an offering she had carried beneath a false moon priest seal. The iron remained locked. The guards remained near. Rhaelor Draeg still stood one step beyond reach, the broken crown fang burning in his palm, while the crown wolf trembled behind him. The altar had named Sivra as witness. It had not yet named what that standing permitted her to do. Halvara Sorn saw the danger before the court understood it. She raised her staff toward the glowing marks. Witness count is not witness authority. A servant may retain numbers without possessing the right to accuse the crown. Sivra forced air past the tightening collar. Then read what the count authorizes. An oath-bound body belongs to the chapel. The theft was written into that oath, which makes the record chapel property. It makes the chapel responsible for what it forced me to carry. A few nobles turned toward Halvara. Not because they believed Sivra, because ownership sounded less sacred when spoken clearly. Rhaelor looked at the silver tally beneath Sivra's skin. Open the witness authority. Halvara stepped between him and the altar. Majesty Hunger Witness Law predates the current throne. It was abandoned because allowing servants to interpret sacred deficits invited rebellion. The words settled through the chapel. Hunger Witness. Sivra had never heard the title, but the altar had. The moonstone answered beneath her knees. 4 records opened around the chains. Living deficit retained. Offering miscount challenged. Hunger altar witness recognized. Crown account subject to testimony. The crown wolf lifted its head. The beast did not approach Sivra. It watched the altar, as though hearing an old law return to a kingdom that had buried it. The first record opened. Long before Halvara's priesthood, the starving moon chapel had kept 2 kinds of servants. Offering servants carried stores and maintained the altars. Hunger witnesses counted what entered, what reached the packs, and what remained beneath the crown. Their authority did not come from blood. It came from continuous account. A witness who carried the full count could challenge any offering whose hunger had been redirected before reaching its intended body. Living deficit retained. The second record followed. The altar showed an ancient winter judgment. A condemned shepherd stood on the moonstone while a witness touched the ration line beneath the royal platform. The altar rejected the shepherd, not because it favored him, because the hunger attached to his charge belonged to the crown's storekeeper who had stolen from the mountain packs. Offering miscount challenged. Sivra stared at the record. The altar was never built to choose sacrifices. No, Halvara said. The answer came too quickly. Sivra looked at her. It was built to correct who owed the hunger. Halvara's face hardened. The old witness system weakened priest authority and divided the packs. It stopped innocent bodies from closing royal debts. It allowed servants to stand above sacred law. It allowed accounts to stand above priests. The third record opened. The title appeared around Sivra in silver lines. Hunger Altar Witness recognized. Her inherited oath had not awakened hidden blood. No ancient wolf spirit rose inside her. No royal mark appeared. The altar recognized function. She had counted enough stolen hunger to become the living point where redirected offerings could no longer be renamed. Her power was not command over the moonstone. It was the legal right to demand that hunger be returned to the account that created it. Sivra looked at the chains around her wrists. "If I am witness, why am I still bound?" Halvara answered before the altar could. "Because recognition does not restore a servant from condemnation." Rhaelor's hand moved toward the iron. Again, he stopped. The final line remained unopened. Sivra saw the restraint and hated how often truth required her body to remain inside the danger. The altar did not protect her. Witness standing only made the record possible. It did not make the court merciful. The fourth account opened. Crown account subject to testimony. Every silver line beneath Sivra's skin turned toward Rhaelor. The broken fang in his hand flared. The remaining crown light dimmed across his head. Behind him, the crown wolf's shadow split along another rib. Halvara struck the stone. A condemned servant cannot place the sovereign account beneath her speech. Sivra looked at Rhaelor. Then the king must decide whether his crown stands above what fed it. The chapel went silent. Rhaelor stared at the glowing witness lines reaching toward him. If he permitted the account to open, every blessing of his reign could be challenged by a servant, still wearing an offering collar. If he refused, the altar would close Sivra's count beneath the same law that had prepared her body as fuel. Halvara lowered her voice. "Majesty, deny the witness. The packs will not survive a crown made answerable to chapel servants." Rhaelor looked at the crown wolf. The beast's ember-gray eyes held no loyalty, only years of pain mistaken for strength. Then he looked at Sivra. She did not ask him to save her. She asked him to be counted. "If her testimony can break my crown," he said, "then the crown was already broken by what it required her to carry." Halvara's composure finally fractured. "You would place royal hunger beneath a servant's word?" "No." Rhaelor stepped onto the deepest ring of moonstone. "I place it beneath the account." The altar shook. Silver light tore through the remaining fangs of his crown and traveled toward Sivra's witness tally. Her chains did not fall. Her collar did not open. But the royal account moved beneath her testimony. The court saw it happen. The Alpha King's strength, the Crown Wolf's hunger, and the chapel's sacred blessings all entered the authority of an oath-bound servant they had prepared to consume. The final record appeared between them. Hunger altar witness active. Royal debt awaiting full count. The royal account moved beneath Sivra's testimony, and the missing fang in Rhaelor's hand began to burn from the inside. Silver fire opened along its hollow center, revealing a line of old moon script no priest had read aloud in generations. The remaining fangs in the wolf crown answered one by one, each carrying the same buried mark. Not blessing. Debt. Sivra remained chained at the altar's center. Her witness tally glowed beneath her skin, but the iron around her throat still carried the order that had prepared her for sacred closure. Recognition had given her standing before the account. It had not returned ownership of her body. Across from her, Rhaelor stood inside the deepest moonstone ring while his crown wolf shook behind him. Two ribs had split into silver light. The beast's vast outline no longer looked powerful enough to frighten the chapel. It looked almost transparent. Halvara Sorn saw the writing inside the crown and stepped forward. Founding. Debt records cannot be tried through a living chapel witness. Sivra looked at the burning fang. Then why was the debt written inside the crown? To preserve a law beyond the understanding of common servants. Read what the crown owed before the first servant was selected. Halvara struck her staff against the altar. The founding account belongs to the royal bloodline. Rhaelor's voice came low. Then it belongs beneath my answer. The moonstone opened. 4 records formed between the king and the witness. Pack hunger borrowed. Crown strength granted. Royal repayment withheld. Servant closure substituted. The first account rose through the altar. Dregmar appeared as it had been during the kingdom's first famine. Snow buried the hunting roads. Adult wolves collapsed beside empty barracks, troughs. Rival packs gathered at the capital gates, ready to tear the kingdom apart over the last winter stores. The first Draeg king entered the unfinished chapel and placed his crown on the raw moonstone. "I need strength enough to hold the packs together," he said. The altar answered through silver lines. "Strength may be borrowed. Hunger must be repaid by the crown that carries it." Pack hunger borrowed. The moonstone drew a measured portion of hunger from every pack, not food, not flesh, but the burden of weakness created by famine. It gathered that burden beneath the crown and converted it into temporary strength for the royal wolf shadow. The first crown wolf rose behind the king, enormous enough to silence the rival alphas. Crown strength granted. The vision shifted. Spring came. The hunting roads opened. Grain returned to the lower stores. The packs survived. The altar called the crown back to repay what had been borrowed. The first king refused. If the crown wolf returns the hunger, the packs will see the throne weaken. A moon witness stood beside the altar. The strength was never yours to keep. It became mine when the packs bowed. Royal repayment withheld. Sivra felt the oldest lie in Draegmar settle into place. The crown had not inherited a blessing. It had inherited strength borrowed during famine and never returned. The fourth record opened. The first moon priests searched for another way to close the unpaid account. They discovered that a condemned body could be converted into temporary crown credit. The altar did not demand the body. It accepted the transfer because the royal debtor refused to pay. A servant woman was selected. Her guilt was written afterward. Servant closure substituted. No dead women rose around Sivra. The moonstone showed only the beginning of the system. One crown refusing repayment, one priesthood inventing replacement, one innocent body used to keep borrowed strength inside the royal shadow. Halvara lifted her staff. The founding king preserved Draegmar. Returning the debt would have divided the packs. "So you kept the debt alive," Sivra said. "We preserved royal continuity. With servants, with vessels whose loss prevented greater war. You made the poor repay strength stolen in their name." Halvara's face remained controlled. "A kingdom is not governed by equal losses." Rhaelor stared at the image of the first crown wolf rising from borrowed pack hunger. His own shadow trembled behind him, swollen by centuries of the same unpaid account. "My crown was never blessed," he said. Halvara turned toward him. "Majesty, it was indebted. The distinction will destroy your authority." "It should." The word moved through the chapel like a blade. Sivra looked at him. "The altar is waiting for repayment." Halvara stepped between them. Repayment would strip the crown wolf, break the alpha line, and leave every rival pack free to challenge the throne. Rhaelor looked toward the nobles lining the walls. They had bowed to the size of his shadow. They had praised victories won through strength, withdrawn from that beast, and life converted from servants. If he returned the debt, the throne might survive only as ordinary power. No sacred terror, no borrowed invincibility. His hand closed around the broken fang. "What does repayment require?" he asked. Sivra read the silver lines beneath her skin. "The crown must surrender the strength it refused to return." Halvara's staff struck the floor. "A condemned witness cannot sentence the king." "I did not sentence him," Sivra said. "His crown entered the account before I was born." Black wax surged from Halvara's staff toward the founding record. Rhaelor removed the wolf crown. The court recoiled. Without it, the silver light in his eyes dimmed. Behind him, the crown wolf collapsed to one knee. He placed the crown on the altar seam. Halvara seized his arm. "If the altar consumes it, you may never command the royal shadow again." Rhaelor looked at the chains around Sivra's throat and wrists. "My command has cost enough bodies." He released the crown. The moonstone opened beneath it. Silver light tore from every fang. The altar pulled the borrowed strength downward, devouring the wolf crown piece by piece, while the giant black shadow howled behind Rhaelor. The altar did not free Sivra. It did not choose her. It counted the true debtor and began collecting what the crown had withheld. The wolf crown vanished into silver darkness. For the first time in centuries, the royal debt began to fall from the shoulders of the packs and from the bodies of the women forced to pay in the crown's place. The crown disappeared, and Rhaelor Draeg fell to one knee. Without the stolen silver light, the strength that had held his body rigid for years vanished at once. His black armor struck the moonstone. Blood ran from the palm that had gripped the broken fang, and the glow beneath his skin dimmed until he looked less like an untouchable Alpha King and more like a man carrying the full weight of his own bones. Behind him, the crown wolf collapsed. Its enormous shadow folded inward, losing height with every breath. The chapel nobles recoiled as the beast shrank from a towering royal terror into the lean shape of an ordinary adult wolf. Its ribs remained visible, but for the first time no silver line was being torn from them. Halvara Sorn stared at the empty altar scene. The crown must be restored before the account disperses. She lifted her wolf-bone staff and turned toward Sivra. Black wax gathered at its tip. The witness carries sufficient life measure. Sacred continuity permits emergency substitution. Sivra heard the old doctrine beneath the new words. The crown had failed. A servant body would replace it. Again, Halvara drove the staff toward the oath collar. Rhaelor moved without borrowed speed. He was slower now, humanly slow, but he reached the staff before it touched Sivra's throat and caught it with both hands. Black wax burned through his gloves. Halvara pulled against him. Without royal continuity, the rival packs will tear Dregmar apart. Then they will see what remains when fear no longer kneels for me. You would trade the kingdom for one condemned servant? Rhaelor's face tightened with pain. No. I am refusing to trade another servant for the kingdom. He broke the staff across his knee. The sound cracked through the chapel. Black wax spilled across the floor, but without the priest seal it could not climb the altar. It hardened into dull fragments around Halvara's feet. The nobles along the walls did not kneel. They did not know whom to obey. Rhaelor had no crown. His shadow no longer filled the chapel. Halvara's sacred authority lay broken in two pieces. Sivra remained chained between them. The altar had collected the crown's unpaid strength, but her oath still carried the final replacement command. The iron around her throat pulsed once. Become the offering. The moonstone opened a last account beneath her knees. Crown strength surrendered. Pack hunger released. False guilt invalidated. Witness body unclaimed. Sivra looked at the final line. Unclaimed. Not royal property. Not chapel property. Not an altar vessel. Her own body. Halvara stepped toward the record. A servant cannot become unclaimed while bound by inherited oath. Sivra lifted her chained wrists. Then read who inherited the right to own me. The altar answered with silence. No priest name appeared. No royal seal appeared. The oath had been passed from servant mother to servant daughter for generations, but the original account contained service freely offered during famine, not ownership, not sacrifice, and not the right to convert life into crown strength. Halvara's doctrine had added those commands later. Rhaelor looked at the iron collar. Can I remove it without closing the account? Sivra met his eyes. For 9 accounts he had stopped before touching her chains. Sometimes because evidence required restraint. Sometimes because kings found law easier to challenge than the suffering directly before them. Now the record had finished. Yes, she said, but not as mercy. Rhaelor lowered his head once. As correction. He reached for the collar. His hands shook without the crown's strength. He could not tear the iron apart. Instead, he took the broken edge of Halvara's staff and placed it against the false command carved beneath the clasp. Become the offering. He scraped the words away, one mark at a time. The collar opened, then the wrist chains fell. Sivra nearly collapsed when blood returned to her hands. Rhaelor reached toward her but stopped before touching her. She chose to place one hand in his. Only then did he help her stand. The altar did not flare. The crown wolf did not bow. The moonstone simply recorded that the witness had left the offering position alive. Halvara looked around the chapel for support. The crown is gone. He cannot command you. One of the lower pack captains stepped away from the wall. A silver blessing cord still circled his wrist. He tore it off. My barrack starved beneath that blessing. Another captain removed hers. Then another. No one attacked Halvara. No one needed to. Her authority had depended on every witness accepting hunger as sacred. Rhaelor faced the court without a crown. Halvara Sorn will stand trial before representatives of the lower barracks, winter patrols, chapel servants, and every pack whose rations entered the royal account. Halvara lifted her chin. Under what sovereign authority? Rhaelor looked at the ordinary wolf shadow beside him. Under the authority I still possess after surrendering what was never mine. He did not claim innocence. He named every blessing rite he had accepted, every servant judgment he had witnessed, and every question he had failed to ask while the Pax praised his strength. His ignorance had been cultivated by Halvara, but it had also been useful to him. The court heard him admit both. By dawn, the Starving Moon Chapel stood open to the winter air for the first time in generations. The hidden stores beneath the royal platform were carried to the lower barracks. Moon milk returned to injured hunt wolves. Grain measures were counted publicly, first by pack captains and then by chapel servants. No offering was prepared. Nobody closed the account. Rhaelor remained king, but the sacred terror surrounding his throne was gone. Rival Alphas would challenge him. Some nobles would abandon him. He would have to rule with judgment instead of borrowed strength. Sivra stood beside the altar wearing no collar. Rhaelor approached without armor or crown. His wolf shadow followed at a distance, smaller now, but no longer hollowing itself to keep him powerful. The chapel needs a hunger, altar witness, he said. Sivra looked at him. Not one owned by the throne. No. Not one the priests can silence. No. And not one praised in public while servants still go hungry below. His gaze held hers. Then write the office so neither crown nor chapel can possess it. Sivra studied the man who had once entered the chapel to witness her death. He had not become innocent by losing his crown, but he had surrendered the power that made innocence unnecessary. I will stand as witness, she said. You will stand as debtor. For as long as the account remains, it will remain longer than either of us. A faint, tired smile touched his mouth. Then I will begin now. He offered his hand. Not as command. Not as rescue. Sivra took it because the choice belonged to her. Together, they turned toward the first sealed chapel register. Behind them, the ordinary crown wolf lay down beneath the open doors, while morning light entered the Starving Moon Chapel and touched an altar that would never again be permitted to call stolen hunger holy.